welcome back to Teens in the Kitchen. So for this episode, we're in the beautiful Sackville Library kitchen and we're making something you've probably had before. So it's a very easy to make recipe, spaghetti and meatballs. So we're going to Italy today and I'm going to show you how to make the softest, most delicious meatballs to go with a really healthy and filling vegetable sauce and spaghetti. So once you combine those two together, you're going to have a healthy meal to feed your family and something you can make for pennies. So I hope you're cooking along with us and let's get started. So we're going to make our meatballs first, and the meatballs are extremely easy to make. So I like to mix everything together before I add the meat because I like to leave touching meat to the end so we're not spreading the meat all throughout the other ingredients. So all you have to do is get a medium-sized bowl, and first we're going to start by adding our breadcrumbs. And the reason you add breadcrumbs to meatballs is because it actually absorbs some of the moisture from the milk and the meats while it's cooking, and it makes it really tender and really, it kind of extends the meat, so you don't have to use as much meat when you use breadcrumbs. So we're using Italian breadcrumbs today, which already has some herbs in it already, but we're going to make it extra special by adding a little bit more. So I'm just adding half a cup of Italian herbs and breadcrumbs to our bowl, and then I'm going to add our milk, which is going to get absorbed into the breadcrumbs. So we're doing a quarter cup of milk, and remember when I said earlier I always use a liquid measuring cup when I'm measuring liquids. It's much more accurate. So if the liquid comes up to the line you're looking for, you're good to go, and you can just pour it in there. So the next ingredient I'm going to put into our meatball mixture is some garlic powder. So you could chop up some garlic and put it in there, but garlic powder has a really similar flavor and it's a little bit easier. So I'm going to do about 1 teaspoon of garlic powder. And I'm also going to do about a tablespoon of Italian herbs. So Italian herbs are great to buy because it's like many different herbs mixed together in one package. So you don't have to buy 4 things, you can just buy the one and it should last you for quite a while. So this has things like oregano, thyme, rosemary, all kinds of good stuff already in there. So I'm going to put 1 tablespoon, which is the same as 3 teaspoons. So we'll do 1, 2, and 3. And finally, we're going to add our last few ingredients. So we're also going to be putting in a small onion, an egg, and we're also going to, of course, be putting our meat and a little bit of salt and pepper to taste. So to taste just means what is your flavor preference. If you love to add more pepper, you can go for it. If you tend to like a little bit more salt than others, you can add a little bit more, but it really is depending on what you like. So if you ever look at a recipe and it specifies to taste for salt and pepper, it really just means add as much as you like. So I'm going to grab a knife and we're going to cut an onion up into very small pieces and add it into our mixture. So if you don't happen to like the texture of onion, you can always use onion powder instead of chopping up an onion into your meatballs. But I really like the texture that it makes within the meatballs, so I'm going to add 1 onion diced finely. Alright, so now we have our onion diced up, and if you notice any bigger pieces there, feel free to run your knife through to get them a little bit smaller, especially if you're not a big fan of the texture of onions. The smaller the better. And you can kind of hide them in there, so if anyone in your family or anyone you're cooking for doesn't love onions, you can cut them up really small, and there's less of a chance they'll even notice they're there. They'll just love the taste and won't mind the texture. So give it a quick run through with your knife, and they're ready to go in your meatball mixture. So once you have your onions in your bowl along with your breadcrumbs and your milk and your spices, you can add about a teaspoon of salt depending on what your flavor preference is. I'm just going to add a little bit. And then you're also going to add your pepper, and you're going to add 1 egg. So the reason you add egg to a mixture like this is because it actually binds it together. So you won't have crumbly meatballs. You'll have nice, soft, moist meatballs that stay together. So I'm just going to crack an egg right into the bowl. And the last ingredient, of course, is our ground beef. So to add this in, I'm going to grab my gloves. And if you don't have gloves at home, I suggest you get a box from Walmart. They might even have them at the dollar store, and they're very, very affordable. So you can get 500 gloves for under $5, so that's going to last you a really long time. So I'm just going to take my mixture here and add in my ground beef. You can use ground chicken, ground turkey, whatever you'd like to use to make it a little bit different. We're using ground beef today. But I do recommend that you always pick lean ground beef. And the reason is because even though it's a little more expensive, you're going to get a lot more meat for what you're purchasing. When you buy something like medium ground beef, a lot of it is fat, and when it cooks, all that fat melts away, and you actually get a lot less of your meatballs. So in the long run, it's actually just as affordable and a lot healthier to buy lean ground beef. So once you get everything in the bowl, you're just going to use your hands and squish it all together. So you can squish as much as you want to get everything combined. And something interesting about this recipe is that you can also use it to make meatloaf. You would just put it in a pan instead of forming it into balls, but it's essentially the exact same recipe. So I'm just going to get in here, get my hands dirty, and mix everything together and make sure everything's well combined. And then we're going to roll them into balls, put them on our baking sheet, which I sprayed with some spray and put some tin foil down. And we're going to pop them in our 400-degree oven for about 20 minutes. So roll along with me. All right, so once you're done mixing everything together extremely well, you'll have a big meatball that looks kind of like this. And so this is the time that you're going to roll them all into little balls about the size of a golf ball and drop them on your prepared sheet. And then they're just ready to pop right in the oven. So I'll give you an example of how big your meatballs should look. So just grab a piece and envision a golf ball and what that might look like in your hand. And once you think you have about enough, just roll it between your palms until it makes a nice circular shape. So something like that. And then just plop it right onto your pan. So this should make about 24 meatballs, and it doesn't take too long to do it all. So I'm just going to finish this up here, and I'll see you in a few minutes. Alright, so I just finished rolling all of my meatballs, and they're all almost exactly the same size, and it's about 2 tablespoons of the mixture. And the reason you want to try to make them as close to the same size as possible is because you don't want one meatball to be raw in the middle and another one to be dry and shriveled up. So make sure they're about the same size. We'll get about 24 meatballs, and once you have them ready on the pan, you can just pop them in the oven, and for about 20 minutes they'll roast. You don't need to roll them around, they'll do their own thing. And that's in that amount of time, you can get ready your sauce and your noodles, and by the end it should all come together really quickly. So this is an extremely simple recipe that anyone can make at home. So I'm just going to pop these in. We'll get started on our sauce. Alright, so while our meatballs are in the oven, I'm going to start to boil our noodles and to make our sauce. So it's going to go by pretty quickly. But all I'm going to do to get started is to bring a pot of water to boil. I fill it quite full because I like to give the noodles lots of room to boil, and they cook a little bit more quickly that way. And I also like to put quite a bit of salt in the water. So they say that you should make the boiled water taste like the ocean, so it should be that salty. And not too much of the salt absorbs into the noodles, so you don't have to worry about eating all the salt you're about to add to the water. But I'd usually add about a tablespoon to the water. And once it starts to boil, you can go ahead and add your noodles. So I'm using whole wheat noodles. As you know, I love whole wheat because it has lots of fiber and more nutrition than a white noodle would have. So it's a lot more filling and a lot more healthy for you. And some people are really confused about how much pasta should I cook, if I'm cooking for myself or for 2 people or more. But my tip is if you're getting a regular size box like this one, which is 375 grams, I usually do half a box for one family of 4. So you can kind of gauge it that way. And another way you can kind of tell if you have a different size box is you can grab what fits between your thumb and your forefinger, and that's usually a good portion for 4 people. So I'm going to go ahead and add my pasta into my water because it's starting to boil. And the way I like to do it is actually twist it around and then take a tong or a spoon and push the noodles into the water. Some people like to break them in half before they add them in, which I think is completely fine. But I really like having long noodles when I eat spaghetti. That's my personal preference. But if you prefer to cut it in half first or snap it in half, that's totally up to you. And these noodles don't take very long to cook, so about 8 minutes. So I'm going to let them do their thing while they're boiling, and then I'm going to get my sauce started as well. Alright, so while my noodles are cooking, it will take about 8 to 10 minutes. I'm going to chop up my vegetables for my sauce. And one trick that's kind of helpful is if you think your pot's going to overrun with bubbles, if you put a wooden spoon over, it's less likely that it will. But if you're still nervous that it might, you can always turn the temperature down. So I'm going to turn it down a little bit so it doesn't overflow, but it's still boiling. And remember, the kitchen should listen to you. So if you're nervous about something or something's going too quickly, you can always adjust it to your preference and to your comfort level. So the noodles are boiling away, and I'm going to start my sauce off with pot and some onions. So by now you already know how to chop up an onion, so I did that for us. And I'm just going to add a little bit of oil to the pan. Just about 1 tablespoon should do. And I'm just going to scoop my onions from the bowl into the pan, which is already pretty hot. You can hear that sizzle. And so we're looking for translucent on the onions. So I've talked about this a little bit before, but translucent just means that they're more see-through. You don't necessarily want to make your onions brown for this sauce, but if they are lighter in color and shiny and a little bit see-through, you know that they're ready to go on to the next step. So after I add my onions, I always do my garlic next. And for the sauce, I'm just going to do 2 cloves of garlic. But if you really love garlic, you can add even more. Alright, so we have our garlic ready, and our onions are starting to get a little bit shiny and translucent. And so we're going to add our garlic in just a second. But I wanted to give you another quick tip for when you're cooking onions. If you add a little pinch of salt, it actually helps them cook a little faster, because salt actually draws out moisture when you're cooking. So just a pinch will really help. And stir that around a little more. And they're looking pretty translucent, so I'm going to add our garlic. And we're going to saute the garlic until you can smell it. When you smell it, it's a pretty good indicator that it's ready for the next step. So while that does that, I'm just going to quickly show you how to chop up the rest of the vegetables. So first of all, we have a green pepper. So the way I like to chop up a green pepper is just slice from the bottom to the top, following the ridges along the sides of the pepper. And once you get all the way down, you can just peel away the pepper, and all the seeds and the top stay intact. So you're not wasting a lot of the pepper, but you're also not making a big mess with the seeds. So once you do that, you can just take the tip of your knife and actually just run it through to remove all the white bits of your pepper. This is called the pith, and the pith is a little bit bitter. So if you want to remove that, that would probably taste a lot better that way. And it doesn't take too long to do. You can even use your fingers to do that. And once you have the pith removed from your pepper, you can just dice it up nice and small and add it to your onions. So to dice my pepper, all I really do is use my claw shape and always use the shiny side down. So that's a lot safer way to cut a pepper. So once you get all your strips done from your 4 or 3/2, depending on what your pepper looks like, then you can start dicing it up small. So I'm just going to finish up my pepper here, and then we're going to slice up our mushrooms next. Alright, so I'm going to add my peppers to my onions here. Give it a little stir. And for your mushrooms, you can actually just so easily dice these up, but the trick I like to do is just to remove the stem first. I find it a little bit easier to cut that way. And for your mushrooms, you don't necessarily want to wash these just underwater because they actually absorb so much moisture. They're kind of like a sponge. So if you just take a damp piece of paper towel or cloth and take any of those dirt bits away from the mushroom, that's perfect. You're going to be cooking it really well anyway, so any bacteria that's on the mushroom will be killed. And so once you do that, you can just cut your stem up into bite-sized pieces and add those right into your sauce veggies. So the more veggies you put into your sauce, the better. Obviously it's going to be extremely good for you, but also it gives it a really great flavor to have, you know, unique different things added in. So you could even try things like carrots, zucchini, whatever you have at home. It could probably go pretty well in a spaghetti sauce. So I'm adding some celery next, and I like to just cut off the raggedy ends of the celery. first, and then I just split it in two. And dice it up nice and small. So at this point we have all of our veggies sauteing for our sauce, and we're going to check our noodles to make sure that they're still al dente. So al dente actually means that your noodles are going to have a little bit of a bite to them, and the reason you want that to happen is because you don't want soggy noodles and you don't want them to break apart in your sauce. So if they're still al dente and they have a little bit of a bite, you're going to have a nice texture when you're eating your spaghetti, and they'll also be able to absorb some of the sauce when you add them to your sauce. So I'm going to test a noodle. I'm going to grab a fork and do this very carefully. Just lift a few noodles out of the water and make sure any hot water is dripping down. You can just pick one noodle apart and give it a blow if it's a little too hot to put in your mouth. Once it's ready, it's perfect. So that was about 10 minutes, and it still has a bit of a bite to it, so I know it's ready to come out of the water. So I'm just going to turn off my burner and drain it in the sink. But before I do that, a trick that lots of chefs like to share is that if you save half a cup of your pasta water to add to your sauce, it really helps bring it together, and it actually makes it a little bit creamier, a little bit more cohesive with the rest of the veggies and all the great stuff we're putting in. So that pasta water actually has a lot of starch that was in the spaghetti when you started cooking, so it kind of almost thickens the sauce. So that's a hot tip for you. Always save a little bit of your pasta water. And I'm just going to drain the pasta and I'll be right back. Alright, so our meatballs are ready. The timer just went off. So I'm going to start on our sauce, just finish it off, and so we can check our meatballs and see if they're done cooking. So the veggies are really soft now, and that's how you know it's time to add your tomato sauce. So this is just one regular sized can of tomato sauce. Nothing fancy, just pure tomatoes. And even if you want to buy low sodium tomato sauce, that's even better, because you can add the amount of salt that you like without having to add all the sodium that already comes in the tomatoes. So you can kind of control the level of salt that you're eating. So once you add your tomato sauce, all you're going to do is add in your trusty pasta water, which does have some salt in it, remember, so don't add any salt yet. Add in about 1 tablespoon of Italian herbs, a pinch of pepper, and hold off on the salt until you can taste it in a minute or two. So I like to leave my tomato sauce simmering on low for about 5 to 10 minutes, so all of those flavors get to know each other and kind of blend together and come in harmony by the end. So I'm just going to let that hang out and all those flavors combine. And so once it's ready for the noodles, you can just pop those in, cook for a couple more minutes, and all of that flavor will come together. And if you're someone that really doesn't like mixing the noodles with the sauce, you can always just put your noodles straight on the plate, pour some of the sauce on top, and then top off with some meatballs. So it's completely up to you. And one final tip I have for you for pasta sauce is if you're feeling fancy and you have some bay leaves at home, bay leaves actually even help the flavors come together more. So if you put maybe just 1 or 2 in a tomato sauce and pick them out when you're done cooking, it really helps make that a perfect balance of flavors. So I'm going to pull the meatballs out of the oven. We're going to check the temperature with our trusty food thermometer and see if they're ready. And then we're going to be able to build our meal. Alright, so our meatballs are out. I'm going to take my food thermometer and turn it on to Fahrenheit. And we're also looking for around 165 degrees for our meatballs. So just stick it in your biggest meatball and see what the temperature comes to. And this one is already going past 165, so I know that they're definitely done. And so I'm just going to pile these all up in a bowl, and then we're going to eat it all together when the noodles are ready. Alright, so our sauce is looking great, smelling great, and I tasted it. It had plenty of salt. So the only thing left to do is to add our cooked noodles into our sauce. And like I said, I like to leave them to simmer a couple minutes. And once that happens and they're all done, we're going to put it on a plate, top with some meatballs, and just maybe add a little bit of Parmesan cheese. I think that would taste really great. So I'm going to let these simmer just for 2 more minutes, and then we're going to be all done our spaghetti and meatballs. All right, it's looking really great. It's been a few minutes, so I'm going to go ahead and add some of our pasta onto our plate, right to the middle. And I like to do a little twist. It's kind of fancy, just to make it look a little bit more sophisticated. And also remember some of the sauce and veggies in here, you don't want to miss those. So get those peppers, mushrooms, all that good stuff on there as well. And that's a pretty good size serving of spaghetti. So I'm going to go ahead and add on some meatballs. One serving is probably about 4 to 6 meatballs. And there is our finished dish. Alright, so I just finished off our spaghetti. I put a couple meatballs on top and just a pinch of Parmesan to make it absolutely perfect. So it's a healthier version with lots of veggies and with our whole wheat noodles. So I really hope you enjoy making this at home. If you want to actually text me and let me know what your favorite recipe was in this series, my number is 782-234-8262. I would absolutely love to see the pictures of the things that you've made over the last few weeks. And thank you so much for joining us. See you later.